A very warm welcome. My name is John. I am the founder and facilitator of TTK Life Strategies. And today, once again, it's an honor for me to talk to my guest, Warren Whitfield. I met Warren, we spoke about it the other day, it's between 12 and 13 years ago, under very different circumstances for both of us, for where we are in our lives now, and it's been quite an interesting journey for both of us. And the one thing that has always inspired me about Warren, it doesn't matter what the challenge is, doesn't matter what the adversity is, to, he's always found a way to turn things around. And he's always found a way to sort of relay a message or a learning from that in all the years that I've been following him. And although we are at the moment 10,000 kilometers apart, there's still that connection somewhere along the line. Every now and again we catch up, and it's always good to hear from Warren. So Warren will share his story with us. So without further ado, Warren, tell us your story.
Thanks, John. I think I'll start at the beginning, the day I was born. I was born wanting a drink and a cigarette. My mother and father were addicts, alcoholics. My mother was a chain smoker, and she really was a chain smoker. She smoked literally 100 cigarettes a day on average. She used to finish 3 boxes of 30 Peter Stuyvesant a day, filters, and she would start on the 4th box. Obviously, that was back in the day when cigarettes were still fairly affordable for most people. Yeah, I used to have a photograph of my mother with a double brandy and ginger ale in one hand and a cigarette in the other hand, very pregnant with me in her tummy. And yeah, so I cried so much when I was born that my mother went blind from lack of sleep, and my father had to take care of me, and because she was hospitalized for sleep therapy, and he did what I suppose adults did back then, which they thought wasn't a problem, and he gave me whiskey and milk to make me pass out, which is exactly what I was looking for. So I would say, my struggles with alcohol began the day I was born. My first memories of my father giving me whiskey and milk to make me pass out. My father was in broadcasting. He was on LM radio. He started 5FM and 94.7. It was called 5FM, and it was called Radio 5 and Radio Whitfield back in those days. And my job was to pour them drinks in the evenings when they came home from work. From the time that I could walk and carry a glass without spilling it, I used to have to walk with 2 hands. And I would, pour the drinks, and I would test it to see if it is how they liked it, And my father, sometimes I would get it wrong, and I would pour him a strong one, and he would say, "Oh, my boy, you've got a heavy hand," and he'd do this on my hair. And for me, that was affirmation. So I kept my father pretty well oiled just to get the affirmation. My mother and I went to bed obviously early in the evenings because I was still a child. My father would go to bed at 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I have thousands of memories of my father vomiting in the bin next to his bed or in the toilet because of him drinking too much. And drinking alcohol and cigarettes had a devastating effect on his health. He had 3/4 of his stomach removed from ulcers because of the alcohol. But I do need to say that I never saw my parents drunk. They drank a lot, and addiction killed them both. My mother died of lung cancer in December of my standard 9 year, and my father died in March of my matric year, almost exactly 4 months apart. I remember the nights my father died. I remember thinking to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? What's going to happen to me? And I was terrified. I have an older sister. She's my half sister. I joke and tell people she's the left half or the top half. Same mother, different father. But being 17 years older than me, by the time I was 5 and knew that I was a child, she was already married and moved out of the house. The strange thing was that I used to call her auntie, and I only figured out she was my sister when I turned 9 years old. When my nephew, who's 2 years younger than me, told me that I was his uncle. And as a child, I internalized that, and I thought that I wasn't good enough to be told. I couldn't understand why my own parents and why my own sister didn't tell me that she was my sister. And I didn't go to either of them and say, why didn't you tell me? I just immediately felt like I wasn't good enough to be told. So that caused a disconnection for me in the family. I felt like I didn't belong in the family from the age of 9 years old. And then, of course, my parents died when I was 16, and they left the booze cabinet full of booze. My senile 90-year-old grandmother was living with us, and she'd been senile from the age of 70. So you can imagine how difficult it was living with her. So when my parents died, they had a 16-year-old who thought he knew everything, and a 90-year-old who didn't know what was going on, as their forced responsibility all of a sudden. And so I think that played a role in being able for me to convince them that it was okay to leave me in my parents' house and finish my matric and carry on with my life there, which is what happened, which was absolutely the wrong thing to do. But, you can't cry over spilled milk. That's what happened. And it's not about blaming anybody. It's about, that's what happened, and this is what I think I remember what happened, So, I was the only kid in school. I remember the principal called my sister and I into the class, into his office, and said to me, "You're an adult now. If you don't want to come to school, don't come to school. If you don't want to do your homework, don't do your homework. Your life is in your hands now. The teachers are not going to spoon feed you anymore. So do what you got to do." I don't think that was the right thing to do, but I never missed a day of school. I never bunked a day of school. I did end up with stomach ulcers from all the worrying, and I had to be put on Zantac back in those days because of worrying so much. And but I finished my matric and I left school. But I would have wild parties at my parents' house because I had no responsibility. My family kind of left me to my own devices. I saw my sister once a month when she came and did the shopping, helped me do the shopping because I was too young to drive. And so, I loved getting drunk. I loved it. I loved drinking. Unfortunately, back in those days, and I think the youth think it's so cool to drink till you fall down and you can't remember what happened the day before. Having blackouts was a regular occurrence for me. So I struggled with alcohol basically my whole life, and I became an alcoholic at the age of 16 years old. After I finished school, I went and studied at Wits Business School. At the end of my first year, I got straight A's, and I thought I'm too clever for this, and I dropped out. And I went to see a lawyer, and I got my inheritance at the age of 18 years old. 3 years earlier than what I should have, without my family knowing about it. I just had to pay his fees, and he got it done. And the problem with that was, I inherited everything my parents had spent their entire lives earning. And within a year, it was all gone, and I was 300,000 rand in debt at the age of 19 years old. And I was embarrassed. I thought I was clever, but I obviously wasn't. People took advantage of my innocence, or my stupidity. And when I did speak to my family, I told them tales of success, because I was too embarrassed to tell them what had happened. I also was struggling with something that was undiagnosed. I'm also what they refer to as a high-functioning autistic, or Asperger's, is more the case. So I have above average intelligence. I have a very obsessive mind. And the problem back in my youth was I couldn't control what my mind became obsessed with. And whatever I became interested in, I went into it wholeheartedly. I learned everything there was to learn about it in a much shorter space of time than what other people, my peers, would. And so I would achieve success all the time. But I was chasing happiness, and I thought happiness came from money. And so I would always chase the money, and I always got it, but I was never happy. And so it just fell through my fingers like sand. I would just become disinterested, and it would ultimately fail. But it didn't fail because I didn't know how to do it. It failed just because I lost interest. Throughout this, and I suppose with all of the pain that comes with being an alcoholic, I did have a sincere desire to find out more about this thing people call God, And I had so many questions, and I just wasn't interested in the response, just have faith, when I had questions. I just couldn't accept that, I had a creator, and I just had to spend my whole life guessing and just trusting and not having my questions answered. And I'm glad that I did choose my own path, because I did get my questions answered. I started to think for myself. But because of the way I see the world, and because of how my brain works, I see things other people don't see. I feel things other people don't feel. I feel them very intensely. It's been very difficult my whole life to verbalize my emotions. And being an alcoholic and addict my whole life, I experienced a lot of trauma, very bad situations. I stole 40,000 rand from a drug dealer. The guy wanted to kill me, and that happened. That happened a few times. I was also a sex addict, a porn addict. And at the age of 25, that's when I started using cocaine. And within 2 months, I completely bombed out on cocaine, ran away from Joburg and went to Cape Town. And that's where I discovered marijuana, started smoking marijuana. But I ended up so paranoid, it turned on me. And I couldn't even have 1 puff or 2 puffs of a joint without becoming completely and utterly paranoid. So and then what I did was I just went from one thing to the next. Either it was ecstasy, or it was cocaine, or it was weed, or it was alcohol, or it was porn, or it was sex. When it comes to sex, my first experience was with the sex work at the age of 17 years old. I was also overweight in school. I was bullied and teased every day of my life. From primary school right through high school, I was called names, I was humiliated, and I had this rage and this anger inside of me that eventually boiled over, and I started becoming violent, and I just snapped, and I stopped taking nonsense from people. When people gave me nonsense, I just knocked their lights out, and it eventually got me into a position where I almost got myself killed when I beat up a Nigerian drug dealer, and suddenly I was surrounded by 5 Chinese guys with knives, and I almost got myself killed that day. Luckily, I had a friend of mine who was with me, and he got me out of it. But I realized that day that if I didn't deal with my anger and my rage, it was going to get me killed. My job entailed socializing. I was in the tourism industry. I was marketing manager of a big tourist transport company over there. So I could arrive at the office with a hangover or still drunk from the night before, because it was my job. My job was to bring in business, and that's how people in the tourism industry do business. They socialize together, they party together, they do drugs together, and well, that was my experience back then anyway. And then at the age of about 29 years old, I discovered crack cocaine, and that was a very quick downward spiral. And then I could no longer function. And I started stealing. I started getting myself into very dangerous positions where I stole money from people's credit cards. And then I ended up in rehab. And I went to go and see my psychologist, who, bless his heart, couldn't help me for 3 years because I went to him every week and lied to him. And so he could never help me. And I walked into his office. I said, I need to go to rehab. And he was horrified, but he got me into a rehab. And I literally ran in those doors and I said, help me. And I was very sincere, but I didn't last 60 days. I went to one of the top rehabs in Cape Town. I didn't last 60 days. I suppose I didn't want it bad enough. Maybe you could say that, but eventually I started using again. And then I ended up in Durban, on the streets of Durban. I went up to Durban and stayed with my uncle and aunt. And unfortunately, after about a month of staying clean and sober, I ended up boarding his Jetta, brand new Jetta, for 2,000 Rand for crack, which I spent in a couple of hours and then walked the streets of Durban. Eventually, I had to come clean, and my uncle left me on the streets of Durban, told me I was a curse to the family, told me they wanted nothing to do with me, that I should stay away from them. And that absolutely broke my heart, because I loved my late uncle. Even to have him say that really hurt me. But the fact was, I had become a curse to the family, and that reality also just shattered my self-confidence, my self-worth, and it broke my heart. I stole 40,000 Rand from my boss because I decided to go out on a binge. And at the end of the binge, I planned to take my own life. So I wasn't worried about the consequences of stealing that money, because I wasn't going to be around to deal with them anyway. And I was awake for about 5 days on crack and alcohol, spending my time with sex workers in hotels. And I spent that money. I rented a tiny room with a single bed for 60 Rand for the night. The floor was a red oxblood paint, stook paint. And that's where I planned to swallow 20 ecstasy pills with a bottle of vodka. And I went out to buy a bottle of vodka, which I convinced a barman at an escort agency to sell me. I bribed them. And I sat at the bar and had my last drink. But I prayed, and I just said, God. And I said, God, maybe I'm going to meet you, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm going to meet the devil, maybe I'm not. Maybe everything's just going to turn black and that'll be the end of it. But in half an hour's time, I'm going to find out, because in half an hour's time, this is what I'm going to do. I don't want to die, but I definitely don't want to live anymore. A lot more than what I don't want to die. I don't know what else to do. For me, I can't face the consequences of stealing this money now. I'll go to jail for theft and for fraud, and I just don't see a way out. And I finished my little prayer, and I was sitting there. There was about that much left of my drink, and I was visualizing the trip back to this hotel room to go and swallow these pills one at a time, sit on the bed, open the bottle, swallow one, until eventually I passed out and drifted into oblivion and never came back. And a woman came in off the street. She was a street sex worker, and she sat down at the bar and she was trying to pick me up. And that was the last thing I was interested in at that stage. And eventually she got up and came and sat next to me. And she shook my arm to get my attention. And I said, like, what? And she said, you don't have to do what you're going to do. And she said, I have a 3-bedroom apartment on the beachfront. You can come and stay as long as you like. I don't want money from you. I don't want sex from you. I'm lonely. I need someone to talk to. You don't have to do what you're going to do. Here was this woman, and she invited me into her house, and she was smiling, and she was happy, and she was showing me compassion. And so I thought she must be a little bit crazy, especially knowing she knew what I was. Anybody could see that. They could smell it a mile away. And for the next 3 hours, I told her everything, every dark secret, everything that I needed to get out of me. I just purged it all out. And towards the end of my story, I noticed the most fascinating look on her face. And it was the look of love and compassion and no judgment. And I've never seen that before on a human face besides my wife, who, thank God, I met 4 years ago. So I finished my story, and when I was finished, I felt, took a deep breath in, and I had a big sigh, and I felt the most incredible freedom like I've never felt in my life before. It was the most incredible feeling, and instead of getting judgment, I got mercy. And she said to me, so what are you going to do with this newfound freedom of yours? And I said, well, I guess I'm going to tell the truth and ask for help and try to turn my life around. She said, who are you going to ask? I said, well, I don't think there's anyone I can ask, because nobody wants anything to do with me. Maybe one of my old school friends might help me. And so I walked across the road and I phoned him. He said, I can't help you. Phone my mother. So I phoned her. She said, get on the bus. By the time you get here, we'll know what to do. But when I arrived at the bus stop in Joburg, my friend searched me. He found my ID book with the woman's phone number in, the woman who'd helped me. And he said, whose number is this? And I said, it's the prostitute that helped me and got me to phone you. And he tore the number up into a million little pieces, so I'll never know whether she was an angel or not. But then they said, we're taking you to a place in Lenasia called Thames House. And I was treated with incredible love and compassion there. And I'll forever be grateful for that. And at the end of 21 days, my life got better and everybody else's life got worse. I was then given an opportunity to go somewhere else for 9 months, all paid for. And I spent 9 months at a place called Hands of Compassion, where I learned how to live in a community with rules and routine and structure for the first time in my life. And after 9 months, I then got a job, and that's an incredible story on its own, but for the sake of time, part-time I studied counseling at night. And after I qualified, I then ran a support group for 2 years on a Friday night, because that was the bad night of the week for me. That was when I went out jolling. So I kept myself busy doing something positive. So I qualified there, And I realized I'd be the first practitioner in the country when I got back. So I asked Dr. Richards, who was my trainer, if he could speak to Dr. Michael Smith in New York, the man who discovered this protocol at Lincoln Recovery Center in South Bronx at Lincoln Memorial Hospital. And he spoke to him and he said, put him on a plane. So I went to New York and I qualified as a practitioner under Dr. Richards. And then I went to New York to, become a specialist, came back to South Africa. I practiced for a number of years, and after about 6 years, I then became a trainer. And I've been using it to help people with addictions for the last 14 or 15 years now. I've probably worked with maybe over 1,200 addicts and alcoholics, gambling addicts, sex addicts, porn addicts. I've trained about 350 practitioners in South Africa, all across the country. And I've just moved to Belito, where I've opened a business with my best friend who beat cancer, lymphoma cancer. He was diagnosed 7 months ago, given 30 days to live, and he's cancer-free. And we used AccuDetox, we used ozone, we used plant medicine, and the oncologists are blown away. So we've started a wellness center here with every kind of alternative practice under one roof, including recovery coaching, addiction coaching, all that kind of stuff here, and in Belito. And this is a concept, AccuWellness clinics. And yeah, 4 years ago, I met my wife. I met her the day after I let go of a belief in my heart that there was no one out there for me. I come to believe that based on my bad choices in life, and that a woman couldn't possibly love someone like me. And I was wrong. I literally met her the next day once I let go of that belief. So I've realized the power of beliefs. I've realized how important it is to do work on yourself and to, excuse my French, I speak a lot of it, to deal with your own shit, and, you can't be a counselor unless you're dealing with your own things, you've got to do the work too. And, by the grace of my God, the God of my understanding, my life is completely different today, and I'm an incredibly grateful man. I have everything that I ever wanted. I have 2 little dogs that I absolutely adore, that think that I'm the best thing since Biltong, and who are so excited to see me when I go home. And I have a home, and I live in a nice house. And, life has been very good to me since I changed my attitude and started working on myself and working a recovery program, getting counseling and dealing with my trauma, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's me in a nutshell, John.
Warren, thank you so much for an extremely inspirational, thought-provoking story, the authenticity, the honesty. I really appreciate that. And if anybody listening to you would like to make contact with you to learn more about what you do, how do they go about that?
Well, they can go and have a look at AccuDetox, AccuDetox.co.za. That is the training side, where I teach the courses to people who want to become a practitioner and become registered with NADA, which is the National Acupuncture Detoxification Association, which is in more than 40 countries, of which I'm an internationally registered trainer. Or they can get hold of me at our new place in Belito, AccuWellness.co.za, ACUWellness, one word, .co.za. Or they can phone me or WhatsApp me. I'm happy to give out my phone number, which is 072 522 5325.
Great. Thank you very much for giving up your time and sharing your story. And I'm sure that it will inspire many people.